Welcome to episode 20 of Building Blocks with Brendan. Today we connect with Amer from TTT Studios to learn how he was able to develop Shop Studio Live as an entrepreneur within the organization. What's really interesting about our conversation is entrepreneurship in general. Now that word has become more and more popular over the years with more individuals writing it down as a skill, adding it to a LinkedIn, but as well as more organizations looking to stay competitive in an ever-changing world. What's really interesting in our conversation was really the approach they had to make it repeatable year over year over year over year. Currently, there has been 2 successful ventures coming out of the studio. But what's more interesting is learning about how a entrepreneur or a startup within a large organization differs from a brand new, fresh seed-funded organization. And what you might be thinking is that, if you work inside an organization, you have more cash flow. There's more money at your disposal. This should be dramatically easier. Your success rate should be astronomical. Well, just like everything in life, it's not as easy as it seems. A lot of these entrepreneurship or accelerator programs within large organizations tend to fail. And that's really due to the issue of almost assigning too many resources too early on. As a famous superhero saying goes, with more power comes more responsibility, or in the business sense, with more cash flow comes more expected ROI. And with a lot of larger organizations, there's more effective ways of spending their money than throwing it into some startups here and there, especially if they have to fund it internally. However, TTT Studios has done it differently by developing a process that is not only repeatable, but allows for success at a much higher rate than you would typically see. Over our conversation, we go over how Amer was able to develop this process, how he was able to take an idea, bringing in his whole team to come up with the idea creation, move it along the stages, get external validation, speak with potential customers, develop a business plan, all while really keeping it as bootstrappy as possible. And that was really one of the keys to success. And that is only using as much as you can. We talk about how some organizations fail, what's making them different, but most importantly, some lessons they've learned over their time. What I found very interesting is that one thing you always hear from founders, or it's more and more common these days, is that getting more money doesn't mean you have more success. In fact, having too much money can actually make you fail faster. And as I spoke about before, it's the idea that the more money you have, the larger ROI you get. If you have a $10,000 seed fund and you raise your business to do $200,000, that's a 20x return. But if it's $1 million, you have to get to $20 million. That is wildly more money and a lot harder to scale. So we talk about how Amer was able to break up resources, develop a plan so that he brought in people when time was required, but not too early, not to put the horse above the cart or cart above the horse. That's the appropriate saying. So hopefully you guys enjoy this episode, learn a bit more about what it means to be an entrepreneur and how organizations can innovate internally without having to constantly acquire new businesses. Hopefully you guys just enjoy this episode. Check out Shop Studio Live as they just got live and have allowed individuals and organizations across North America to create a selling experience that is quite unique. Thank you so much for joining me today. We met obviously, like some other guests, through the MBA, through UBC, but compared to a lot of people I've spoken to, you have a very interesting thing in kind of what you're doing today. It's very unique, very much still entrepreneurship as well. But as we spoke to a little bit about before starting this recording, was that building a process around it, trying to really make it repeatable, not just a one-off thing. So I guess to start off, introduce yourself. What do you currently do, and kind of how did you get to where we are today?
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Brendan. Really appreciate it. I'll do the long-time listener. This is like the radio, but yeah, love listening to Building Blocks and the people that you've had brought on. I'm the director of product and innovation at TTT Studios. And TTT Studios is a Vancouver-based design innovation studio. Mm-hmm. Essentially, we help businesses build software solve business problems through technology. That's really the main goal for TTT Studios. We've been around for about 12 years doing that. I joined about 2 years ago to help TTT Studios do the same thing, but instead of doing it for clients, doing it for ourselves. So essentially my role and what I've been able to do over the last 2 years is to create a process around, internal innovation and everything from ideation, validation, and kind of launch of new products, and taking them to market, and both doing it and then also doing the process at the same time. So it's been a lot of fun, and definitely the MBA was kind of the stepping stone for me into the space.
Sure. And so, you've worked on a few different products that were, I guess businesses as well. How does that start? Is there a monthly, a weekly like ideation session? Is it one of the employees who comes up with an idea they think would solve a solution? How does the initial ideas
Mhm.
form?
Yeah, so it's varied so far, and I think we're very open to how that happens.
Mhm.
So the first product we worked on, which was called Amer and I, a facial recognition product for event check-in, was kind of the brainchild of one of the staff members who had done his master's degree in kind of the 3D modeling and facial recognition space, and had built his own algorithm. And the company decided to put some resources behind that and see if we can create a business around it. So that came very much based on some employees existing work, who kind of became a co-founder of that product as well. However, what we're trying to now, as we trying to create more of a process around this, we're trying to engage our staff. So the way we did it is, we decided that we wanted to start a new idea or product. We do a very wide theme, let's say. So, really our theme in our last kind of ideation sprint was, the world during and after the coronavirus, like very much what is on the precipice, and what's going to be coming in the future. And then what we do is it's an engagement process. So like you said, we went in and talked to our employees. So I did interviews with probably about 20 staff members. We had, whether it's like, those were all calls, but then we also had the option of people submitting things through like a survey. We kind of took those ideas, again, created a process around how we validate them, and then ended up with a smaller number of ideas that we kind of did a more deep dives into. But yeah, very much, we're very open to how we do that. And we're hoping to do these sprints hopefully on an annual basis, or maybe twice a year, to essentially be able to create products more regularly.
So that's really interesting. I feel like
Mhm.
I like how it's a combination of both. It came from one employee, and then as well as trying to develop a way to make it a little more consistent. So I think that's one of the things you always hear about is can you like not force creativity, but can you make it a structured creativity, or
Mhm.
does it always have to be top of like a random thought, like the eureka moment? And I think there's really a way of combination of both. A lot of times, unless you have to solve a problem, you never really think of any solution. So I like
Mhm.
the combination of both. What you were saying, you
Mhm.
start very broad, but the key is, I always find, you have to start with a problem you're trying to solve.
Mhm.
And for you, it was like, how has life changed after COVID? And then from there, getting ideas. But what's really interesting, well, I guess what I'm curious about is,
Mhm.
when you get all these ideas, do you have a template in your mind prior to seeing them to like rank them, or is you go into a room, do them on the whiteboard and kind of say,
Mhm.
because I know with an idea, a lot of times there can be a lot to it. Like the idea might sound bad, not never bad, but maybe not make a lot of sense. But then when you understand what it really means, there could be something. How do you go
Mhm.
from that ideation process? Is it just a description of what the idea is? Is it just one
Mhm.
word, or do you then talk to follow up with some ideas you might see
Mhm.
promising?
No, that's a great question. Yeah. So the way we went about doing that, the first this time around, was I put together a scorecard, kind of based on a broad sense of market, product, potentially even team. Like, could we even rally a team around an idea like this? Which is how often a VC might look at an early stage product or a company. So it was a very like basic scorecard when we were looking at that set of about 30 to 40 ideas. And I think one thing to also emphasize is, instead of actually pitching them, telling our staff to give us ideas, what we said, what problems are you facing, or what problems do you expect that we have? So we actually tried to start at the problem stage. So eventually what would happen is we had certain problems that then might have had, idea A, idea B, idea C, because, hey, it's a cool problem and we could probably solve it in these two or three different ways. So we try to keep all those doors open in a sense. So we definitely got the problem pitches first, and then kind of looked at those through this, let's say, scorecard, which again I had prepared prior to the process, had spoken to our management team about this is how we want to do it, and also was the one who not on my own, but like it was something I got everyone on the executive team to also look through. So the actual first of all, let's say quantitative assessment. So not to make it sound like too much like school or what have you, but really we scored the ideas individually, took kind of the average of them, looked at which ones kind of, let's say, rose where maybe let's say the top 10 or top 5, and which ones maybe didn't or had problems. But then I believe, had at least 2, if not 3 meetings where it was like what you described. So we said, okay, well, hey, we have these 10 ideas. How do we go from 10 to 3 or 4? And actually, because we once we get to that number, we're now actually spending more time and resources on deeper dives into them. And those were discussion meetings. And it came down to things like, hey, you know what, this is too technical, like in a specific industry vertical. So maybe it's a problem, but maybe it's not for us to tackle. To things where it's like, well, maybe this is something that doesn't align with our mission or vision for the entire company. So maybe that's not something we should tackle. And that came out more in that discussion session. That's like more qualitative versus the quantitative scorecard, phase. So yeah.
No, I like that a lot. So I've done some research and some work on like brainstorming, like just developing a methodology for brainstorming. And as you're aware now, brainstorming is not something that can easily be done. That's why a lot of people hire consultants, or it's a full, it's a process. You just can't be, we have a whiteboard, let's throw ideas down. And I like how you said you start off with a problem and then possible solutions, because I find once you have a problem or a good problem, it's a lot easier than first think of solutions, but also frame what they're trying to solve. And also sometimes ideas come together. And what I found interesting also how you said it is you went from like the 30 to the 10, but then had a different process once you got to those 10 stronger ideas to go through it. I think that's one challenge I've seen a few times is you try to go from, 100 to 1 in one day or in one meeting. And it's, I don't know, you could for sure do it, but I don't think you'd ever get a good quality because, like you said, there's other lenses you have to look through, and then scoring independently is always great. No matter, I always found, even in like group work in school where everyone's a student, there is no one should have a influence on the rest of the team members. What happens is when you score together, everyone starts just group think just because I want to leave this meeting, or I like what would always happen is, especially if it was like a tech problem, I'm like, I'm not that tech focused on the dev side. Well, this person said this idea was better. He must know something I don't. And a lot of times they're like, true. It's everyone's opinion. So I like how you kind of broke it up and made, like you were saying before, made a process to solve it. So when it comes to ranking them, obviously this, organization you'd be starting, or the company within the company, there is a lot of people that, people and time that has to be spent towards it. At that stage, are you looking at who in the organization can hop on this project? And then they would work part-time, or are you making a separate company separate from the main TTT Studios? Kind of how does that work?
Yeah. So what we try to do is we try to, like, let's say, push off the spin out, let's say, point until we have the product, let's say whether it's an MVP or the actual product itself validated in the market. And we'll talk a bit more about, our current product. And I think we're getting there now, which is kind of exciting. But because we have a lot of these internal resources, what we really try to do is, when we do have this idea solution combination, and then maybe we're down to 4, we're now doing more validation externally as well with more stakeholders as well. So actual customers. And that starts off again with just maybe the deep dives into the problem. When we start kind of developing solutions, we start again deep diving with potential, UX wireframes, or to kind of see if we built this, is this something you would use, or do you think your customers would use this? So when we do get down to 4 ideas, again, one of, I guess, the biggest themes I'm really trying to bring to TTT Studios, even though we're a software developing company, is let's postpone the development as much as possible, because that's the most resource intensive thing. So how much can I do on business and design, or customer engagement or user engagement upfront, so that when we actually start deciding, we're ready to code, we know almost exactly what we want to build. And so that's, I'd say, like kind of our approach. So for us, for example, we went from, so 30 ideas to 10, from 10 to about 4. And those were the 4 we kind of did the deep dive into. And then from the 4, we ended up picking one again through kind of another scorecard methodology. But also kind of the one other cool thing here that I'll also emphasize is that because, we went with one idea, we still now have 3, I'd say, reasonably healthy potential ideas on our shelf as well. So it's kind of cool because, next time around, we'll probably start the ideation process from scratch. But we also know at any time that, we have these 3 potential ideas. And maybe it might be a matter of, someone comes to us with a problem that's related to that space. And we're like, hey, we maybe can work together. And because we think this is an area of opportunity as well. So it kind of makes it interesting because, the ideas that you, let's say, kill, there's ones that are definitely not going to be, ones we work on, but there's still some, I would argue that, maybe 1 or 2 that might not have gotten picked at the first time around, but maybe their market has evolved or their, that space has changed in, the year since you've analyzed them. So not to sound like, we try not to be attached to the ideas, but it's kind of nice to always know that, there's usually something that's maybe on the shelf there as well.
And I think that's one cool thing is if you went through the analysis of certain ideas, even if they don't work, it could be one of those things where the market changes and you're like, oh, the reason we discarded this idea or killed this idea, tech is so violent. It's always, killing everything. But, maybe it could be we killed this idea because the market wasn't there or the customer interest wasn't there. And then, working with other customers, one day you never know, they might be say, oh, hey, we're looking for this one product that does this. And you're like, well, funny enough, we actually have some ideas around this and you have something to kind of work towards. So, you filter it down, you get to one idea. Now, one thing that always can sometimes happen when coming with ideas is that the individual who came up with it might feel like it's theirs always. And that's, no matter how, that's can always be a challenge. How does that happen? Does the individual who came up with the idea, do they help contribute at that stage? Do they help along the way? Or do you really say, hey, look, this was the idea. Now we have to develop business that might be completely separate. How do you kind of break, I don't know if break's the right word, but separate that connection from the person who invented the idea versus what the business is going to be?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think one thing that I remember pitching to the team, and actually this came up, I think, internally from a team member. And we very much said early on in the process, we said, hey, if you have an idea that you think you're going to pursue on your own or what have you, like don't feel like you have to share ideas with us. Like, we're really here. If you have an idea or a problem that you, because of personal passion or desire, want to see a solution for. So that's really kind of what we tried to emphasize early on. And we also said that, hey, like if, as an employee, we never promised anything, let's say up front, but we were very clear that if there was alignment with, what you were doing for your work and you wanting or had the desire to be, an advisor or consultant or become a co-founder on this idea, there's definitely potential. So kind of encouraging in the sense of like, hey, we can't promise anything. An idea is just an idea. There's millions of them out there. But, at the same time, if things kind of work out in a certain way or, throughout the process, we can engage that person and see if there's a fit. We haven't really had that, had any problems with that yet. But, again, maybe in the future, that's something we have to be much more clear about up front as well, because it could definitely be a source of issue or conflict really in the future too.
No, but I like the idea of you just saying, hey, look, like this idea, I think setting the groundwork is so important. We're looking for an idea that TTT is going to make a business out of. If you have a business that you want to start, don't bring that up, because then it's super awkward to be like, oh, I came up with the idea. And then you're like, well, TTT's building it. But I always think that's a fair conversation to have in the beginning and make apparent that like, this is what the intentions are. And obviously within your organization being a, tech-focused company, I feel that is more common, especially in tech, to realize things are being developed much more quickly. Everyone's giving input, and it's more of a group effort than one individual really taking all the praise. But
Glory. And we did that kind of in a town hall style setting. So like after, we created the process and we're planning to start it, I believe we did like a town hall
mhm,
with the company. And that's where, we had a lot of questions come up, and it was, again, worth obviously that
mhm,
transparency. And then, in a lot of contexts, we are still, a startup studio in its
mhm,
earliest stages, but I think, those types of details will, kind of evolve as we do
mhm.
as well. So
I'll know for sure.
yeah.
And so, what was the idea? You're now. I
Yeah.
think you spoke more about it on, was it July 7th when it was being
Yeah, I
released,
mean, I
or
think yesterday technically was our
oh,
official
that's
kind of
today.
launch
Oh
date.
yeah.
Actually, yeah. So it's definitely still fresh,
Mhm.
hot off the press here. But yeah, so essentially the idea that, and I'll kind of start with a solution up front
Yeah.
first. And essentially what we built is a product called Shop Studio Live, and
Mhm.
essentially it's a live shopping product. And what that means, it allows e-commerce merchants
Mhm.
to embed a live stream video, a live chat, and featured products directly in their online store. And so the best kind
Oh.
of image I can paint is that, let's say you're in you're you know you're going to buy these new shoes online, and maybe they're from a fancy Vancouver-based
Mhm.
retailer, and you're kind of browsing. But instead of there being kind of just a chat button on the side, you actually see maybe a sales associate there talking about the latest shoes that have dropped,
Mhm.
that day, and they're maybe going through some of the features, and they're testing how they're, water resistant, and
Mhm.
what they can do with the, cool activities they can do with the shoes. So that's ultimately what it is. So instead of kind of seeing that chat bubble, you're actually just seeing a video there that you
Mhm.
can then expand and also chat with and react to and browse products
Mhm.
through as well. And our idea there, so really, when we kind of look at it and going back to the problem,
Mhm.
really for us, it was, we were thinking about, well, how is e-commerce going to change because of
Mhm.
COVID? And really, a big part of it was hearing a lot of merchants saying that they were feeling helpless. Like while e-commerce was
Mhm.
obviously doing well, a lot of, let's say, small and medium merchants were saying things like, "Hey, I put money into Facebook ads. They seem to work most of the time. People come to my website. I do all the things that I'm told to do, like have good images and, put a chat bubble on my website, and, have good product descriptions and things like
Mhm.
that. But I feel helpless. I don't feel like I'm doing anything active." And as we dug more and more into that, it was that sense of, being a retailer, let's say, that has their own store or connection with their customers, doesn't exist as much in an e-commerce setting. And not only that, when we started talking more to them about, well, why? Like we're really kind of digging in, like, well, you have tools like Instagram Live. Like this isn't, like tell us more about, what are you doing right now to feel that engagement? And people would say, hey, well, we're live streaming, but I get a bunch of viewers, and it's people who see the Instagram notification, click on it, watch for 30 seconds, and leave. Right. And so for us, when we started thinking of solutions, we started thinking about, well, how can we capture those people that are in the consideration set? So people who
Mhm.
know the product, know the brand, might already be shopping, right? And really kind of push them from that consideration to the conversion step.
Mhm.
So I definitely like to emphasize that because, again, there are a lot of awareness level marketing
Mhm.
solutions, let's say, that are in the live streaming space. But
Mhm.
really for us, the vision for the product is creating that human connection to ultimately get shoppers to go from considering,
Mhm.
buying something to actually buying it.
Mhm. That that is so interesting because most when you think of ideas, especially within tech, it's always the like you said, awareness stage. Like, how do I get my
Mhm.
product aware? Now now that everyone's aware of my product, they're going to go to the website and buy it. But anyone who, when you study anything business related, there's a few other stages in between that. Just because you know a product doesn't mean you're necessarily going to buy it,
Mhm.
and just because you're on a website doesn't always mean you're going to buy anything from the website either. You can always be
Mhm.
searching around. So I find it interesting that the idea was, and I like how you made it clear that there's products for awareness, but there's not a lot of almost like the human feel in regards to consideration or really getting that
Mhm.
personal touch within store, especially when you're buying anything. I find is
Mhm.
that like when I'm shopping, like there's always a few things I'm looking between or stores I'm going to, but then it's like, okay, I have a question. I don't want to either ask chat or it's like I have a very simple question. I was gonna buy it, but I don't feel like sending an email, or I don't feel like
Mhm.
doing. It's not gonna do. But having that button where it's like, oh, a real person. And at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, even with all the AI, it's always nice to see someone and talk to
Mm-hmm.
someone. And Zoom made that obvious. Is like, oh, why isn't your camera on? What's
Yeah.
wrong? It's like, why does that make a difference? But
Yeah.
that human element always is huge. So I found that very interesting because I would have never,
Mm-hmm.
considered that as a even an option. Even though we have cameras, it seems so
Yeah.
obvious that really doesn't seem like something that is that blatantly obvious. And also, unless talking to and you were able to talk to retailers, I would have never even
Mm-hmm.
thought of that as being a challenge. So
Mm-hmm.
I like how it was connected to COVID and everything, kind of making that next stage. So when you were talking to individuals, was there any type of business you felt or you've seen fits better for this versus
Mm-hmm.
others, or have you seen across the board that all retailers
Yeah.
are feeling these struggles?
So, I mean, I'd say we talked to a good chunk of people,
Mhm.
both, us requesting to talk to people. We also kind of ran before we even built anything,
Mhm.
this was back last year, we kind of ran a fake marketing campaign to see if there's even interest and kind of looked at what kind of companies signed up and
Mhm.
then followed up with them.
Oh,
So I'd say we kind of got an interesting, like wide selection of companies, but I would say the ones that kind of stuck out were the ones that we had the most number of
mhm.
where I would almost I don't know what the category is, but I would almost call the category like specialty retail.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
someone who was selling something that almost no one else was making, but they were kind of selling it at a scale where it's not an Etsy product, it's a Shopify product that they're making multiples of. So some examples of that was a Shopify store for unique socks. So there was someone who made socks kind of based on novelty things, but also very much like news related. So they were always on top of funny quotes that happened in the news, and they would make socks around that. A
Mhm.
brand that's doing um, like handbags, purses, and things like that. But the only graphics on that is of corgis, for example. So like just companies that had something that they wanted to show off, and maybe
Mhm.
they already were had a good social media following related to that novelty product. Where I'd say the most of the ones we saw.
Mhm.
Other ones, I'd say other categories that are maybe more generic. Then I'm glad we saw some early validation of those, like health and beauty. So a lot of companies that were either selling things like supplements or things like soaps, lotions, hair products, and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, and that's I'd say what we've seen so far. I'm
Yeah.
excited to kind of see more. Right now, we've kept our kind of tool, Shop Studio Live more as like a tool to so that the merchants can be as creative as possible and use it
Mhm.
how they want. But I definitely think that as we maybe niche into different industries, we'll create maybe more specific features for
Mhm.
those subsets or customer segments.
Well, that's so interesting. I always think for a lot. I mean, you brought up supplements. That made a lot of sense as well. It's like those items
Mhm.
that are. For me, for example, like supplements would always seem like something that's quite simple. Like, okay, I need a protein powder. Or I need something. But
Mhm.
if you ever try googling it, there's 1,000
Yeah.
different ones. You're like, and the problem with a lot of these products nowadays, sometimes, is that all of them are pretty good. Sometimes all of them are okay. Like you can
Yeah.
never go wrong. But there's always that buyer's remorse where like, was this the best one? And I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of times, every time I go to a retail store, even if I know what I'm going to buy, just someone saying, that's a great choice. I tried that. I'm a
Yeah.
fan. Being like, oh, someone else likes it.
Yeah.
I know I'm right. Like it's just that extra level of validation to see a human agree with you that you made the right decision can make
Yeah,
such a big
exactly.
difference.
Which is actually funny because I realize that's exactly what happens when I walk into Body Energy Club or
Mhm.
Popeyes. That's exactly like there's probably like 1,000 products there, and whatever you touch, the sales associate will be like, "Oh yeah, like that's a great product." They probably haven't tried 1,000
Yeah.
products, but like you said, that little bit of human proof, that social
Mhm.
proof, even if it's coming from a sales associate, might kind of push the
Mhm.
purchaser across the finish line. So it's kind of interesting point.
Mhm. And
So
especially
yeah,
for like building a brand, having that customer
yeah.
retention. I think especially on the customer retention, just having that
Mm-hmm.
more positive experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty new to the whole Shopify world. So kind of
Yeah.
you just launched things, things are kind of ramping up now. How does it work? Like, do you have a specific niche you focus on? Do you kind of
Mm-hmm.
just keep it open to anyone
Yeah.
who wants to sign up and subscribe to it? Kind of how does
Mhm.
that work on the business sense now
Yeah,
that you're
for
live?
sure. Yeah, so it's obviously been very interesting for us because we've had to learn that space as we've grown. And I think for us, I'd also almost say strategically, while we valued this problem and saw the market potential for it, um, we also wanted to learn about Shopify. So we looked at the Shopify platform last year and we're like, we actually haven't really we have limited experience, let's say, with e-commerce and Shopify as TTT Studios, even as a whole. So why don't we actually challenge ourselves in a way, if it makes if there's a business case here to build our app on Shopify. And, as we started looking, we're like, it makes the most sense. Shopify has, I think over 1.7 million merchants or so they claim. They have an app store ecosystem that's very strong. They just actually made some huge announcements like 2 weeks ago that, previously they used to take, 20% of, the revenue that you would make, which is very common for app stores like iPhone and Google Play and things like that. However, last week they announced that they're no longer taking a cut at all unless you're a developer that makes over $1 million on their platform. So it's actually a huge, benefit for any small and medium developers that think that they're going to be making apps and want to make, $999,000 a year to start, right? And then after that, you do pay, but you obviously only pay a portion of that, of whatever you make above $1 million. So again, being very smart about how they do things. So it's exciting to see. And I think one kind of interesting, metric that stuck with me from their last, again, big announcement was out of the companies that are in their, app store ecosystem, I believe there's 4 unicorns. So imagine that, like, not only is obviously Shopify this huge company that's on the stock exchange, now companies that are building, using that platform or on top of that platform are themselves becoming these huge businesses as well. So again, a very interesting, I think, strategic business play. But then when we think about the user, again, that's where we see, again, millions of users, an app store ecosystem that's very robust. I would say there were more on the development and technical sides, a bit of a learning curve for our team members. But now that we've, I'd say, laid down the foundation, everything seems a lot easier. So it took us a while to make sure everything's fast and everything authenticates the way Shopify needs it to authenticate, which usually isn't really the best kind of route for an early product because you kind of usually want to get something out there to take it to market. But I would argue, or the hope here is that, the Shopify App Store in a way is our go-to-market strategy. So obviously have, strategies to reach out to people. We have a mailing list and a wait list already and things like that. But now that the app is available on the App Store, any merchant who's searching for, a video commerce solution, any merchant who types the word live shopping or video commerce or shoppable videos finds us on there and then can download it and try it out, try out the app before they subscribe. So, again, it's been a really interesting learning curve, very strong platform that's obviously just, continuing to grow really, really rapidly. And I think our kind of, in a way, go-to-market strategy was to build on this platform.
That's so interesting, especially that 20% cut to zero for up to $1 million is huge, especially for a lot, I don't know if it's called indie development, anywhere outside the game world. But
for sure,
like, if you think about someone who, I know for a lot of these, like the Salesforce marketplace and all, I mean, there's businesses, like you said, there are 100 million, I guess you say $1 billion businesses who only really operate within a marketplace of another company, which is, I would have never thought that would be such a big business, but you see it everywhere else. It can be huge. But what I was saying was it's super interesting that the 20% removal up to $1 million, because like for a lot of those smart developers, that is quite a bit of money to give up, especially if something you're trying out, that even though even from Shopify's sense, like the 20% of $1 million being 200,000, a lot of money for sure, but they're worth billions and billions. So if you can get someone to get past $1 million, they're like, okay, this is perfect. Like it's always so interesting how on a business sense, it seems to make so much sense. But it really introduces a lot more people into the ecosystem.
Exactly. And I think for us, it's kind of interesting, right? Like we're thinking, again, this is partially like the MBA side of things, but you start thinking about the Shopify people that had to make that decision and probably looking at the data and saying, hey, we have enough companies that are now making over $1 million that the the revenues we're making from that group is more than enough to maybe support that ecosystem. And we're maybe seeing this many startups joining the App Store, this many of them actually making it through to making more than $1 million a year, and so this actually maybe makes more sense if we can get more, like, in a way, by making this, hopefully what they're probably doing is widening the top of the funnel, so getting more startups in, and then hoping that also the bottom of funnel, like even if it widens a little bit, it widens a little bit, but it's widening at a much like larger dollar amount. So it's super interesting to see. And they were actually really, I would honestly say like we had like a lot of, they've been changing the platform a lot and evolving the platform. So we've had to adapt to those changes, which was always never easy because, you want to just develop something once and not have to go back to do it, or fix it multiple times. But I would also say that, their review process, once your app is on the App Store is a very strong and they helped us, I would almost argue, make our app better and faster, by the time it got to the App Store. So I'm also just excited about that as well on its own too. So
that's so exciting. And so now that it's live within TTT Studio, is there now a separate team, or are people still working a portion of their time? How does that work on the employee side of things now that you're kind of going forward with that?
Good question. Yeah. So, it's all kind of evolution and progress, really. So just to quickly maybe describe our previous structure with Amer and I, for example, at that time, that was just myself and a co-founder. Then once we started feeling like there was some traction and, for example, we're able to get some non-dilutive funding, we built another team we had a designer and another engineer. So we had a team of 4 that are working on this full time. That was the previous idea. With this one, so far, we've built it mostly through, internal resources. So an internal team, some amazing co-ops that have been, fantastic at helping us both on the development and business side. But I think, again, we're now coming down to the time where, once we get that maybe early validation in the next few weeks to months, we'll definitely start seeking out a team to lead this new product. So it would actually be someone, to potentially the technical side, bring in someone who can lead the business side even. And then that would allow me to go back and do it all over again. And that's kind of our goal with a startup studio model, is that if we can actually hire in a team to take things that are validated, like take a validated concept to scale it or, try to scale it, is definitely kind of an interesting approach. And hopefully in that sense too, we find maybe people that are aligned with, our values and aligned with maybe have a more industry specific experience or, whether it's in e-commerce or marketing, for example, and really take this to the next level. But really, in the meantime, our focus, so myself, a few of our co-ops and some of our internal resources who will be kind of more on the project part-time, is to make sure the app's stable, continue kind of building out our roadmap for our features, and just making sure that we are going to always be kind of at least one step ahead of where we want to be, or where maybe some of our competitors might come in and be. So really trying to stay competitive and go to market.
That's so interesting. I feel like, I haven't heard many businesses who've really had an internal, I guess, like startups within the company. I always hear about like companies having their own accelerator programs. And I know a lot of them do fail. Like it's very hard, it seems, to have any success within trying to create creativity internally. I think it's for a multitude of reasons. One, as you know, startups can be relatively risky. So any dollar spent to one idea could be easily converted into hard cash doing what they're doing today. How did you get past that? Or was it like kind of, how did it start at the top? Because creating ideas is great. You could have an amazing idea that makes a ton of money, but businesses are inherently relatively safe. So how do you convince someone to say, hey, look, we are making money. These developers are giving value here, guaranteed value. They're making more than their paycheck. Let's take them out and take a risk here for possibly, depending on, you don't have to go into like what your ROI timeline is, but really taking that risk. How did that happen? Was it, I'm assuming, top down, or
exactly. Two things here. So I think first of all, the top down approach. So I would say that I think the founders of TTT Studios and the executive team had always had that desire to build their own things. I think part of what we love and this is building things that we enjoy, want to build and enjoy building, and the idea or the prospect almost of being able to do that as an organization is definitely a big pull. And also like having our own startups, that is definitely top down. It's coming from the leadership team that made that decision. I think I would at least like to think that our kind of early success with Amer and I, prior to COVID, provided some signal that this is actually possible. So, hey, if we actually get lucky with the idea, And with a lot of hard work and determination, with some small resources, we could actually see a path to how an idea can make it big.
Mhm.
And so I think those two things combined. So I would say that first experiment of a product, and then that top down mentality is why we've continued to do that now, and then are now kind of on our second product, let's say. And that's really where we're at now, right? And so I think the interesting thing with Shop Studio is, right now we'll definitely see how much traction there is behind the product, what our customers want. Is this, is what we've built, what, and based on what they've told us, actually what they want, or is there something different? We really don't know that yet. And I think that's kind of what's kind of the most exciting about this stage. So obviously we're very invested or committed to the idea, but it's also going to be up to our customers and users to see what works for them. And so I'm really excited, really excited to see kind of these next few steps and how that evolves. And like I said, really the vision here for us is that we iterate and do this multiple times, being very resource conscious. So I never say things like, hey, I need like 10 developers or, so I think also maybe being a Canadian company, or maybe my approach to trying to be scrappy and entrepreneurial, is to say, hey, like I started earlier, like I don't want to put developers on a project before I've done as much validation on the business and design side first, for example. And then when I do bring in engineers, I want to be very kind of creative on how I resource. So maybe it's a combination of, co-op students, contractors, and maybe like a lead from within TTT that supports us, part-time or full-time, depending on the commitment. So really trying to be, again, very creative with how we resource our projects so that we can take risk and run these experiments. I hope at least has been, the reason the management team and the executive team is excited about kind of continuing to do these types of experiments. So, yeah, no, it's definitely been a lot of fun and just like an amazing learning opportunity for myself, and I think for us as an organization. Like, we're trying something new. We've made the decision to try something new, and it's just been really cool to see our products, in the hands of the users. That's ultimately, what we want. And just very excited kind of for our launch for Shop Studio, which is now like officially on the App Store. So whether you Google us or you look at the Shopify App Store and find us, that's my like little plug. It's out there now. And I think it's like, you kind of take your, I don't know, maybe baby, and you take them to the nursery. I don't want to say college, high schooler and going to college. It's really like a baby that's going to a preschool, and to see, is that baby going to thrive? And that's really what we're hoping for is some really awesome early adoption.
And I mean, your process makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of, I like how you said, like, there is an understanding of it being inherently risky. And I think it does come down from management. I mean, first the founders founding the company as well. But the idea is that, hey, we realize that we could be the right people on it. There could be a lot of things, but at the end of the day, there is some risk that is out of your control, no matter what you do. But I do think that it's very important to have that buy-in from the top. I always found what's making the other incubator style ones where it's like, oh, hey, if we're investing in you, we need 30x within a year. Like, this is what our products do. We need this from you. And that pressure can first be unrealistic for some products, because there might be a long tail, take a little while, or individuals not really understanding how a startup works or a small company works. I think a lot of times you watch on TV, you're like, oh, if my startup isn't $1 billion by the end of the year, I failed. That is, well, if you could do that consistently, first of all, you're $1 trillion business. And you keep doing that. There's all that inherent time it takes, knowledge it takes. From your experience, obviously doing this 2 times now, what do you think are either the misconceptions, or why do you think some organizations who try this might not be as successful as they think? Is there some things you learned that you feel are either taken for granted or a little bit more difficult than it seems?
Yeah, really good question. Maybe like I'd say like one of the things for sure is not getting to, in the early stages, like too attached to a single idea. Really feeling like, let's come to this with an open mind. Let's have discussions and debates that are qualitative. At the same time, try to link things that are quantitative, so we can make some see how things kind of rank in comparison to one another. And I think the reason I say that, I think there is a lot of ideas that I think even came up last year that I'm still like, no one's done that yet, or being like, oh my god, we had this idea a year ago, and now we're seeing maybe another startup that saw a gap in the market, that gap that we identified, and is now pursuing that idea. So again, it's that's been really kind of interesting to think about, is just don't get too attached, and realizing that any time you spend also just deep diving into like 20 ideas is just a lost opportunity cost as well. So I think for us, like, we wanted to do the deep dives when we had about 4 of them, but we also knew that at some point we needed to focus on one, because again, when I'm working on 4, I'm only working a quarter of my time on, on these each one. So it was really that idea of how do we also make that decision to start focusing. I think that's definitely one big thing. And I would say, I'm trying to think what other kind of big thing is. I think just running more experiments. Like, I think we're doing a good job with that, but I honestly think that, like, something that I don't think I'll ever have enough of is touch points with users throughout the process. So I think we did a lot of that early on, pre-development. We did that a lot, I'd say, in the last couple of months, kind of pre-launch. I would probably say that kind of in the middle of development, we were maybe a bit too much in the weeds, and should have maybe come up for air a couple of times to get kind of more feedback. But I think those customer touch points, during the development stage are, I think, very important. And I think, now that we've launched, again, we still have obviously capacity to change and upgrade the product and stuff, but it's really thinking about, always keep in mind, like, you're building this for someone. It's easy to forget that, honestly. Like, I think you probably hear that from everyone out there, but and I thought I was like, I had that in my mind, so I was like, I'm immune to I'm not going to fall into that trap. But the reality is, you get into this build mode, building blocks, build mode, that you forget that, hey, I need to actually kind of look around me, make sure that I'm talking to the person next to me, or I'm talking to the person who I'm building this for. And doing that, I think the more and more you do that, the better. And we've tried definitely to do that here as well.
And I think 2 things that seem important is, one is, like, for you spending your whole time working on developing these ideas, I think one of the challenges I've seen is that if someone's like, hey, can you start a new company? 10% of your time can go there, 20% of your time. I think that was one issue, is if you're half thinking of it, it's very hard to start anything, especially when you're competing with startups who have maybe a few founders who are in undergrad, who have no dependents, can spend all their time on it. You do need to commit that time.
For sure.
And another thing I think, which is interesting, which I'm surprised to hear, is the scrappiness as well. I think people sometimes don't realize that, for example, if TTT was like, hey, here's $1 million, figure it out. I think the same with getting funding. The more money you have or are given, the more return that has to come from it. You know what I'm saying? So I think it was a smart of, especially with you saying, okay, we don't need a full-time developer. We still have to test all these things. Okay, we have an idea. We've talked to a few people. Let's get things started quite slowly. And I think to some people that might sound like, oh, that's why don't you just go pedal to the metal and launch right away? But you need to talk to so many customers.
Exactly. And I think the one key thing that I guess I keep coming back to, and I don't remember when I thought of this or said this the first time, but I keep coming back to this, is like, is this problem a problem that we can solve if we had more money? And, like, you can argue that, sometimes if you had, an infinite amount of money, you hire more people to solve a certain problem. But I actually argue in a lot of the innovation, creativity, especially earlier stages, having more money maybe doesn't help. You actually need that time to let ideas brew while you speak to people, while you connect the dots, and having 10x resources, maybe having a little bit more resources might help, but like, having a lot more resources won't help. So it definitely helps being scrappy. And then same thing when you build, right? Again, like, you definitely want to go from 0 to 1. And then, like, I really do think that, you want to go from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10. So I think once you get to the 1, you want to put in the resources and really drive it forward once you start seeing potential for some kind of product market fit. But from 1 to 0, you have to still be, I think, very kind of cognizant of every resource that you spend. Just really purely because you don't know what's happening. Like, you're learning as you build. Ultimately, like, I think for us, that's, again, I think a huge takeaway is we've learned so much in the process of building the app or the solution that like, again, having more money I don't think would have helped, for example. So I think that scrappiness of trying to build something in-house with a creative, set of resources. But also, again, like I said, we still have a team. Like, it's not like we're just bringing in anyone. Like, we still do have like a semblance of a team, and I think that's also important. So, not to undermine that thought, we do have at least people who've contributed, let's say, to Shop Studio Live. We know who those people are. Everyone's helped us in very different capacities. So there is a team for sure, but we're definitely very aware of how we do that as well. So yeah, it's an experiment. So
yeah, I like how you keep going back to it's an experiment. I think that what's all a lot of people forget, I feel, is especially in the corporate setting when innovation may be tough, is that people always view an innovation as something that has to give an ROI in the short term. But really, innovation is just like some might say getting an MBA. It's it's long term. You're looking for the future. So maybe in a year you might spend some money, lose some money. But the idea is that by keep doing it, eventually culture changes, people change, and you get some results. But
exactly,
it's been a very interesting conversation. This is one of my by far my unique ones, especially when it comes to. It's rare you can hear of such a well laid out process to go from an ideation to a organization and a living, breathing company. So what kind of, I guess to end it off, what are the next steps? What's the next, thing for Shop Live? Is there a time when you get to hand it off? Kind of what is the future look for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've officially just launched yesterday. So really for me, I think over the next, little while, it's seeing what kind of traction is there with this, core product that we've built. And obviously we'll be doing some, marketing and maybe some paid marketing, some organic marketing, some PR to get the word out there, and really see what happens. Now, if we start feeling like there is traction and maybe people are now asking us for more features, right? I think that's very common. We have a lot of ideas, but I think that what I'm hoping is that if we start getting to that point where people are saying, hey, this is really cool, I want this and I want that, and maybe if I had this feature, I'd be willing to pay more. And we've kind of tried to allude to that in the sense of, on our pricing on our website, really, we have an intro plan, which is the one we have now. But I also kind of have an imaginary plan out there that's like, hey, we want to build a bunch of other features that are going to be more expensive. But, kind of tell us what those features are. Like, we know we're going to put in a lot more, more resources into this. So really that idea of seeing where it goes. And then, ultimately, if we do see that success and that traction, then it's definitely looking at it, finding a team who has like either experience in e-commerce or marketing tech or what have you that wants to come help us build. Like, ultimately, that's kind of the chance that TTT took on me when they brought me in for Amer and I, and that's really what I want to hopefully find in the next group of people that are going to come and build Shop Studio Live. And then, that would then take me to go kind of, again, go back through that ideation process and essentially do that, the second time around. And throughout this whole building phase of Shop Studio Live, we've definitely kept the funnel open in the sense of, when people sometimes will Slack me in the company now, and say, hey, I've thought of this idea, or someone will say, I was at my vet and like they said XYZ. And so like, I'll take a lot of notes. I actually have like a full kind of idea handbook right now, but we'll probably still do the staff engagement process as well to see, what's out there, pick a theme, engage with the staff and see what's next. But that's really it for us. I think, just keep building, keep hopefully doing, one or two of these businesses a year internally. And really, like you said, really seeing and planning for some kind of outshining success or outstanding success as well from one of them.
For sure.
Or many of them, not one of them.
Yeah. and it's such an exciting journey. It's so unique to hear of a company, not only an innovative company, but an innovative company creating innovative companies. It's almost like one of those dolls with like a business in a business, which is very exciting. But thank you again for coming on the show. And it was been very exciting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brendan.